Let's get right into it. Number 8. The Monster Study. Imagine being a kid in the 1930s, excited to learn how to read and speak properly, only to have your teachers suddenly start gaslighting you about how awful your voice sounds. That was the premise of the so-called Monster Study, which, spoiler alert, has nothing to do with Frankenstein, but everything to do with ruining children's self-esteem. Conducted in 1939 at the University of Iowa, researchers wanted to see if stuttering could be taught. So naturally, they rounded up a group of orphans because what's more ethical than experimenting on children who don't have parents to complain to? Half the kids were praised for their speaking skills, while the unlucky half were constantly criticized, told they were defective, and pressured into believing something was wrong with them. Here's the kicker. The kids who didn't stutter at the start began showing signs of speech anxiety. Some even developed lifelong communication problems. Turns out, if you tell a kid enough times that they're broken, they'll start acting broken. Revolutionary. The study was kept under wraps for decades because the researchers knew, deep down, that maybe bullying orphans into speech disorders wasn't the best look for science. When the study was revealed in the early 2000s, it was widely condemned, and Iowa eventually had to issue a formal apology because, better late than never, 60 years later. Punchline: the monster study proved you can teach kids to stutter, but it also proved researchers were the real monsters all along. Number 7. The Rat Park Picture. A rat in a cage with only one toy cocaine water. Not exactly the life of the party. Unsurprisingly, those rats went full Wolf of Wall Street, chugging that drug-laced water until they overdosed. For decades, that was the scientific proof of how addictive drugs were. Then along came Bruce Alexander in the 1970s with the groundbreaking thought, what if rats just need better real estate? Enter Rat Park. Instead of isolating them in barren cages, Alexander built a rat Disneyland big cages, toys, tunnels, friends, and food. When given the choice between plain water and drugged water, the rats in Rat Park mostly ignored the drugs. They were too busy living their best tiny rat lives. The moral addiction isn't just about chemicals, it's about context. Isolation and despair make substances irresistible, but community and purpose make them way less appealing. Humans aren't so different. A lonely apartment with nothing but Wi-Fi and an energy drink isn't that far off from a rat in a shoebox with cocaine water. Of course, critics debated the study, and addiction is still a super complicated issue, but Rat Park forced psychology to rethink the whole drugs are evil on their own narrative. Final jab, the real takeaway isn't that cocaine water is irresistible, it's that rats apparently know how to build healthier communities than most humans do. Number 6. The Little Albert Experiment. Okay, or here's a nightmare recipe: take an infant, introduce him to fluffy animals, and every time he reaches for them, smash a loud metal bar behind his head. Congratulations, you've just invented lifelong trauma. In 1920, John B. Watson and Rosalie Rayner wanted to prove classical conditioning works on humans, so they borrowed an 11-month-old baby known as Little Albert and paired his innocent joy of petting a white rat with the terrifying sound of clanging steel. Predictably, the baby learned to fear the rat. But it didn't stop there. He generalized that fear to anything fluffy rabbits, dogs, even a Santa Claus beard. Nothing like ruining Christmas forever. The researchers never bothered to uncondition Albert, so he possibly grew up fearing anything that shed. And the identity of Albert himself was a mystery for decades. Some historians believe he died tragically young, meaning the experiment didn't just scar him, it may have been his defining moment. What did science learn? That you can condition fear like a party trick. What did Albert learn? That science is terrifying and Santa is out to get you. Punchline: Little Albert didn't sign a consent form, but if he could have spoken, his first words would have probably been, "Get me out of this lab, Karen." Number 5. The Stanford Prison Experiment. Ah yes, the 1971 psychological train wreck that every Psych 101 professor salivates over. Picture this: a bunch of college kids are randomly split into guards and prisoners inside a fake jail built in Stanford's basement. The question, how much does environment shape behavior? The answer, apparently a lot faster and uglier than anyone expected. The guards, given uniforms, sunglasses, and free rein, went full dictator mode within days. We're talking humiliation tactics, sleep deprivation, and power trips so intense they made actual prison wardens look like kindergarten teachers. Meanwhile, the prisoners broke down emotionally, some crying uncontrollably, others rebelling, and one guy literally having a full-blown mental collapse. The study was supposed to last 2 weeks but was mercifully stopped after just 6 days. Why? Because even the guy running it, Philip Zimbardo, forgot he was a scientist and started acting like a warden himself. It took his girlfriend pointing out, "Hey, you're basically running a cult now," for him to pull the plug. What did we learn? Put normal people in a toxic system and they'll become monsters frighteningly quick. It wasn't so much a psychology experiment as it was an improv class that went straight to hell. Punchline: the Stanford Prison Experiment didn't reveal bad apples, it revealed how fast humans can turn into rotten fruit salad when you give them sunglasses and a clipboard. Number 4. Milgram's obedience study. Let's say a guy in a lab coat tells you to push a button that shocks another person. Not a cute little zap either, like screams and possibly dies levels of voltage. Most of us like to think we'd walk out. Right. Yeah, about that. In the 1960s, Stanley Milgram recruited volunteers under the guise of a learning experiment. Participants thought they were teaching someone in another room by shocking them whenever they gave a wrong answer. In reality, no one was being electrocuted, the screams were pre-recorded. But here's the terrifying part: about 65% of participants kept pressing the button all the way to the danger lethal setting just because the authority figure told them to. This wasn't some fringe sample either. These were ordinary folks teachers, salesmen, postal workers, basically the same people who cut you off in traffic or judge your grocery cart at checkout. The study showed just how easily humans will trade morality for obedience when pressured by authority. It also sparked massive ethical debates because a lot of participants left the lab shaken, believing they'd just fried a stranger alive. But hey, at least science proved once and for all that the phrase "I was just following orders" isn't just a Nazi cliché, it's disturbingly human. Punchline: Milgram didn't just expose obedience, he also invented the world's worst game show, Who Wants to Be a Sociopath? Number 3. The David Reimer Case. Here's a story that sounds like the setup to a grim urban legend, except it's painfully real. In the 1960s, baby Bruce Reimer suffered a botched circumcision that left him without, well, essential equipment. Enter psychologist John Money, who thought, perfect, a chance to prove gender is purely social. So he convinced the parents to raise Bruce as Brenda, a girl, while keeping it all secret. Money treated this poor kid like a science doll, insisting Brenda was proof that gender identity could be molded entirely by nurture. But the reality: Brenda hated dresses, rejected dolls, and was miserable. She grew up depressed, ostracized, and confused. Eventually, the truth came out, and Brenda transitioned back to living as David, but the psychological damage was already catastrophic. Tragically, David's story ended in suicide in adulthood, a devastating reminder of just how reckless and arrogant the experiment was. The case became a cautionary tale against forcing identity through pseudo-scientific ego trips. What did psychology actually learn? That biology and identity are way more complicated than one man's theory. And maybe using children as guinea pigs in your personal academic crusade is a terrible idea. Punchline: John Money wanted to prove nurture wins. Instead, he proved that arrogance dressed as science ruins lives. Number 2. The learned helplessness dogs. Imagine you're a dog. You're in a harness, minding your own business, when suddenly zap, you get shocked. No way to escape, no way to fight back. Eventually, you just give up. Later, when the harness is gone and you could escape, you don't even try. That's basically the core of Martin Seligman's learned helplessness experiments in the 1960s and 70s. Seligman wanted to study depression, and what better way, apparently, than to make dogs profoundly miserable. In one setup, some dogs could stop the shocks by pressing a panel, while others had zero control. The dogs in the helpless group eventually stopped resisting at all. Even when the experimenters opened the door and freedom was right there, they'd just lie down and whimper. The point was grim but groundbreaking. When creatures are conditioned to believe they have no control, they stop trying even if the situation changes. And yes, that applies to humans too. It's the psychological cousin of staying in a bad job or toxic relationship because you've been trained to think nothing you do will matter. On the plus side, this led to valuable insights into depression treatment and resilience training. On the minus side, a bunch of innocent dogs had the worst spa day ever. Punchline Seligman discovered the roots of depression, but at the cost of turning man's best friend into man's saddest metaphor. Number 1. The Rosenhan Experiment. Alright, imagine walking into a psychiatric hospital and saying, I keep hearing voices that say empty, hollow, and FUD. That's it. No other symptoms. In 1973, psychologist David Rosenhan did exactly that with a group of pseudo-patients. All of them were admitted. And here's the kicker, they were diagnosed with serious mental illnesses and kept for an average of 19 days. Once inside, the pseudo-patients acted completely normal, but doctors still interpreted their every move as pathological. Writing notes, compulsive behavior, pacing around anxiety, making eye contact, aggressive tendencies. Basically, once you were labeled mentally ill, everything you did was seen through that lens. The experiment exposed how psychiatric diagnoses at the time were more about perception than reality. It embarrassed the mental health field so much that hospitals challenged Rosenhan to do it again. He agreed, and hospitals proudly claimed to detect several fakers the next round. Except plot twist, Rosenhan hadn't sent anyone in that time. They just misdiagnosed their own patients. Yikes. The study was revolutionary, but also controversial. Critics argued it undermined trust in mental health institutions, even as it pushed for reform. Still, it made one thing crystal clear once people slap a label on you. Good luck convincing them you're not just a walking DSM entry. Punchline Rosenhan proved the line between sanity and insanity is thinner than hospital pudding and just as suspicious. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.